Hello, welcome to another video. Hope you're having a good day. Today I'm going to be reviewing a game of myself versus Nightmare of Haikyuu, otherwise known as Reimer. And this will be on the map Stitch Monster V2. In this match specifically, I really wanted to go over the concept of leverage in Fog. Leverage, if you don't know, is where you're using one position to exert pressure, and then you're sort of moving back and forth from different positions to try and force some kind of response or lack of response of your opponent. So let's just think about this for a second. I can draw a line down the center of the map, and we can divide this map into a couple segments. There's sort of like an upper segment here, sort of like middle upper, mid, lower bottom, and then like corner bottom. So you've got like 5 segments of this map. At one point in the game, you're probably going to be pressuring probably 1 or 2 segments. So if you have most of your army in like this segment, you can pressure the properties that are contested within these areas, and you can sort of push out your opponent to either set up their units to defend or back off and move somewhere else, in which case then you can go for the properties. Stitch Monster is a pretty interesting map in that there's a lot of contested properties. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I would say all of these can be fairly contestable and are the properties that you want to go for. You don't want to go any farther in. It can be really risky to go for a property such as like this, or go for any of the comm towers, because it's generally just like a little bit too far into your opponent's territory, and if you're fully committing all your forces up there for one property, it's generally better for your opponent to then front shift and then just take like all of your contested properties, and then say like, okay, I give up 1 property and maybe a comm tower, and I still get like 4 properties potentially, and I get like a first move towards these areas. So it's important to leverage a position in the middle particularly, because then you have the options of going either way. You can go towards the top, you can go towards the bottom, and you've got that extra flexibility. And then how you utilize that is based on your opponent's response. So we'll talk about that more as the game progresses. So we're gonna go through a bunch of the early turns really quickly. It's just normal cap phase stuff. Reimer does decide to go for a transport copter instead of the artillery, so that just means he'll have a little bit more ability to get towards the contested properties earlier, but his defense of those will be delayed because he won't have the pipe seam broken. So he's moving out, doing the boosties with his transport copter. I go for a recon to apply some pressure while I'm breaking this pipe seam, and I want to look for it to defend the properties that are on my side of the map. So these properties, because I know that that's the safest spot for the recon to take hits against the opponent. So moving out the recon, moving out my infantry. So also important to note, Reimer doesn't cap the comm tower first, he's going for the properties. Smart, there's no engagements so far, so you want to go for properties first. So he's able to use this transport copter to boost this infantry towards the center property, so he can get this contested property completely uncontested with the transport copter. So that is one benefit of that build. This turn I'm able to break the pipe seam, so the next turn I'll have 2 tanks and an artillery moving together towards whatever side I decide to make my strong side. Reimer goes for both of these contested properties. The one right here is a little bit more suspect than this one, since the bottom, this one, he should easily be able to get because that is his property on his side of the map. But this property is on my side of the map, and one of those properties that you're probably not going to get early on. And if he does get it, it's not going to stay in his hands for long. He also does not have any backup for this, so I think this is particularly risky. So on my turn, I get vision of this infantry with my own infantry, and then I can go for a recon hit because I know it's on my side, so it's a pretty safe recon hit. And that recon is covered by a tank, so even in worst case scenario that there was some kind of tank, I would still be able to get a hit back. So Reimer's turn. He's going to continue to use his transport copter to ferry more units, and then caps the center property, so he's got that contested property down. In general, he has a faster development towards the contested properties, but somewhat of a slower development on the rest of the properties. So I decide to go in for the cap on the center property, kill off that infantry, and now I see, oh wow, he's already capped this center property. So that usually leads towards the idea that he does have a transport copter, since that's a very early cap, and this infantry basically made a beeline for the property anyway, so it gives me a fairly good indicator that I should be up some vehicles in a fight if a brawl takes place, since I have an idea that he might have a transport copter. So day 10 is where the game sort of really kicks in. He goes for a tank hit and an infantry hit on this to stop the cap. Potentially this is where you're going to play around this line is where you're playing around the center, and that you have the contested property and your opponent does not, so that gives you some leverage to play against the opponent. You have that income lead, you could have that income lead, and then you could continue to brawl against them. And the center is really not too much on either side, so it's a fine place to brawl. Goes for this interrupt here to try and prevent any income swings, and then he starts his own caps, bringing his tanks to the center, but still his tanks are kind of disjointed. This front tank here is not covered by any of these tanks. They cannot reach, so makes it pretty dangerous, and I end up going in for the tank hits, and they're free, essentially. Now, I go in for interrupts as well on his side over here. We both have kind of similar plans of using our infantry to interrupt the caps towards the top and the bottom, and then bringing our forces towards the center to get center control. But I get center control first because of this tank kill and because of my build doing the artillery first into a bunch of tanks and recon. This way I have gone to the center first, so it's harder for him to also plant his tanks in the center, since I can just go in and get hits on them. So he has to play a bit back. So my presence sort of expands a little bit, like out here. So he has to move his tanks into positions like in these forests, on these cities, places where he's much safer, but he still has the ability to go to these different areas of the map. However, this does mean that if, for instance, he wanted to go towards the top part of the map, it's a little bit harder when you have your units sort of disjointed into different sections, since a tank on the city would probably want to go and reinforce the bottom side or go towards the center, rather than taking another turn to go towards the side. On the other side of the coin, oh my god, this tank in the forest here, if you decide to go there, would rather go towards the top, but if there was some kind of fight down on the other side, it would take more time. So by exerting this pressure from the center, I'm sort of forcing some more awkward defensive moves. And on the other side, for me, all of my forces are congregated in one area, so they can all decide to either go in for one side to defend on my top side, or I could even start shifting down towards the bottom. And this gives me a lot more power and sort of like a first move towards whatever side I want to go to. So, do my builds, build up a medium tank so I have some ways to wall break. So, Reimerd, as I said, moves into these defensive positions because these keep his units safe. And when you lose a unit early, you just want to play a little bit defensive until you can get up enough of an army to make some kind of a push somewhere. So he's just kind of waiting on what move I take. But he has vision with this infantry on the mountain, and he's sort of just, seeing what's happening. So I decide, hey, he's getting some vision over here. This infantry is pretty much in my area, and I have this death ball all clumped up in one area. So I feel pretty confident going for kills here, so I can kill off that infantry with my tank and my recon. Then I can go for this hit on the infantry right here, and then just start making a nice little wall. And now I have, leveraged this position I had in the center, moved it up towards this next section, this sort of like middle upper section. And now it's a pretty stalwart defense here, so breaking that isn't going to be easy. And then I start this cap here. Basically, I'm threatening, okay, you can interrupt this, and then I'll shift all these units back down to the center. They're pretty much all in range to do something in the center. Or you can just let me have this, and I'll start to accrue an income lead, since I'll have all my contested properties, and he is still missing this contested property and this contested property. So I can use this, if I can get both of these properties, I can just sit back and sort of move back and forth and try to fake him out, and I don't have to really make too big of an aggressive push into him to win the game. So day rolls in, he gets up on the mountain to get vision, see what's happening, sees my entire armies there, so he knows what my general game plan is. Moves back all his units. And he's being very defensive, and he is all clumped up in this area. This is one area you never want to go into. So when you see an opponent do something like this, where they're going back within like 2-turn range of their base, just move to the central section of the map. So I clear out stuff, I get vision on this mountain, I see there's no infantry in range to do anything aggressive onto my properties, and then I just slowly move up. Basically just threatening this position. Because it'd be pretty hard to get this artillery. It's covering most of the good hits that he can get onto my units. I go in for getting all these kills onto his infantry, so making sure that he's not getting these 2 caps, because I want to play around the fact that he does not have these 2 properties, and slowly get more income and more unit value. And in this position, I also decide to not build copters. The reason being is that just copters are not as good. They still probably do the job just as well because of the 2 comp towers on this map, but I don't want him to be able to get any really easy swings in terms of kills, because anti-air can get really effective kills. One-shots from the anti-air can swing fights. If you can get like a bunch of copter kills, that could be something that loses me the game. So I just want to be safer with my air defense and just go for anti-airs and forego getting some extra infantry onto the battlefield. Reimer's turn comes out. He gets vision on these infantry. Just get some good trades onto them, but he's still sort of locked out of getting this property. Goes for the cap here instead of attacking because wants to try and get the captures going. Wants to get something. This recon here probably is going to be sent down to the bottom because he sees that there's my entire army of vehicles is at the top. And he wants to get his contested properties. But now Reimer is shifting towards a more central position, but this is also still defensive. You can see that my position is more aggressive on this front, so it's kind of forcing him into a more defensive approach. So from this position, I decide, okay, I've sort of swung him from the top. Now he's in the middle with me. Now I'm in the middle. So I don't want this property to get taken. So while I'm going in with my infantry, I want to shift my units towards a position that allows them to fight in this sort of lower area in the next turn. Or at least threaten it. So I move my tanks up, still maintain a good wall for my artillery so that it dissuades any attacks that he would do. I use this infantry to attack this infantry, just because I thought that there could be some potential wall break with using this these two full infantries onto this infantry and then creating a space to sort of break the wall systematically and kill off these tanks and maybe get to the artillery. So that's why I decided to go for that. Okay. And then I also go for a Neo tank. Neo tanks are really what you want to be going for in the late game, just because they have a really great amount of movement and firepower to break pretty much everything else. If you can get them on top of cities, especially as Jess, they're kind of immovable, except by other Neo tanks. So, and I even decided to base skip for that. So he goes in with the recon, lets him kill off this infantry, and lets him sort of see what he's up against if he wants to go in for something. He does decide to move this infantry into the forest, so I see that, and he wants to try and grab some value where he sees me move my entire force to the south. So while this tank is sort of stranded from the main fight, it can pick off units, so he can pick off with that infantry and tank. So he's just trying to find some weaknesses in my death ball, since the main weakness of the death ball is that it can only affect 1 or 2 sections of the map. But as you can see, this position that I've built, every single turn that I've played in this game, I've moved what section my army is in, trying to leverage the pressure, move Reimer back, and then try to find some value elsewhere, in one of the adjoining sections. So I see him get kind of aggressive up here, and my first thought, I think, when I was playing this game, is that I don't want these infantry right here to be threats, because they're threatening captures in 1 turn if they can clear these infantry here. And so I don't want to abandon that front right now while there's that ongoing threat. I currently have this property sort of prevented for a while, and I know that he's going to get this property because I couldn't get enough infantry to protect it. But because my army is more centralized here, it's much easier to defend a property here. So I think, okay, I'll just play around trying to get this, and then eventually my hope is to try and shift my army enough down to the bottom side of the map that I can capture these properties. But I need to wait for a moment when I'm not threatened myself at the top. And so with these infantry threatening, I have no choice but to go to the top. Okay, so now let's see what I do. So I go for this recon kill because this is the only unit that's really sort of very forward in his position. Just kill off the infantries where I can. Move back in a more defensive position because I don't want him to get off free infantry kills. I want these infantry to still be available to interrupt if he goes for caps. And then here I decide this is probably my most vulnerable position I've been in right now because I'm kind of moving back up from being in sort of a bottom center. I'm trying to go into like the sort of top center area, but as you can see, there's a lot of shoals and there's a lot of weak terrain, and it's also he's also been able to centralize all his units into a spot that could attack this position with every unit on the next turn. So I just try to use my infantry best I can to try and make a wall that is a little bit harder or might require using his tanks to kill off a couple infantry, just so that I can prevent a couple vehicle attacks if he decides to go in. I move my artillery up to try and cover best I can and dissuade any attacks, because right now I'm perfectly happy to just sort of let a proliferation happen, because I'm picking off a bunch of units of his, and I'm slowly moving back and forth, back and forth. So he really doesn't want to be keeping like one turn behind me. He wants to sort of do some kind of engagement at this point, probably, to stop me from leveraging my position back and forth. Because he's going to keep bleeding units, and eventually I'll have enough value to go in for attack on his weak side, and he won't be able to defend it, and he won't have enough of an attack on my side up here to get any value. So let's see if this holds. So Reimer's turn comes out and gets some vision with his infantry, gets vision of this forest infantry, and then he can go in, and now you can see he's going all in. So he goes for the turbo charge, kills off that infantry, uses the tank to break that infantry, so then he can bring the copter in. Copter hits the tank on the city, then he can kill off that tank. That copter hits the tank, tank kills off that. Tank hits there, one-shot the recon, one-shot the artillery on the shoals, and then the copter goes in. This is a really annoying copter because it's trying to sort of trap this medium tank, because my tank here, he does not go for an engagement on, but if it took an engagement, let's just say like it took the engagement here, my medium tank has nowhere to go. It would basically require that this tank moves out of this location generally, or there's just like a bunch of tanks that he's sort of threatening that they can do nothing on the next turn. This tank here is stuck next to a copter that this anti-air wants to kill. So I have to find some like target for this 3 health tank. This tank wants to hit something, but it wants the medium tank also to probably break the position there. So there's just a couple things that are really smart about this position. It uses this transport copter really nicely to block in the medium tank. So now, like, that's kind of scary right there. I definitely had to take a long time looking at this turn because basically he's just decided he's not letting me leverage my position in the center anymore. He wants to try and break it open by getting the first power. And in these sort of matchups, it's usually power. You get the first power and you get the first strike, but then you're going to get hit with a superpower in return. So that's exactly what I do. I go for overdrive, and I find a couple of interesting plays. So I go for this 2 health HP sack on the tank, which allows this tank here to go in, and then I can use this anti-air here so that I still have a target for the 3 health tank, and I also free up my medium. Can go up here with my 2 infantry and clear that infantry. This anti-air down here can now kill off the copter there. And I want to try and take engagements again that are sort of on my side. So I want to take this line. I I want to take out all the units that are in this area, and I don't really want to push too far into him. So I can see that he has an artillery here, but that's like way too far into his territory, so I'm perfectly fine getting shelled by it for one turn. And if he stays in that position and I got a good trade, maybe I can just break the position the next turn. So medium tank can kill off that city tank. Can sack another 3. I can sack that 3 health tank here, so I can break that tank. Bring in this Neo tank here to kill off one more tank. Get this tank onto the city to kill off that infantry, since that was the only thing it could hit. Then we got 1 tank hit here, 1 tank hit here, and then finish that tank off. And this was a really crushing turn. I can also interrupt that cap with the infantry, and then that cap is done. He is no pressure. The amount of units I have here compared to Reimer now is really scary. It's pretty overwhelming because his army, you can see he's got 3 medium tanks, but these are all very slow and they're still sort of coming up here, and he's also got an artillery coming up. So these are very defensive oriented units, and he has very little offense left. So basically means he has to retreat after taking that trade. So he uses his recon. He's deciding to try and pressure down here where he knows there's only infantry. Goes for the hit onto that infantry because he knows that infantry is dead anyway, so why not get a hit? And then he moves all his units back into that more defensive position that he's been in for a while. So again, when you see this kind of position where your opponent goes back into a very defensive location, never follow them. Leverage your position. Now I have center priority, I have priority over this side, and I also know for a fact that there are very few threats to these properties at the current moment. So I don't want to just sit around here. There's nothing I can gain from sitting around here. I don't want to go further and try to capture this property or this property. That's like a pipe dream. I want to go down to these properties. I have some infantry on the way that I can ferry with a black boat, and I have some threats to cap, and there's also very little defending down here. With him shifted all the way up here, it would take him another turn to move towards the center, which would also be dangerous since I know I have a unit value lead. So it would be very hard for him to defend a position if I decided to shift down that way. So I kill off the infantries, and then I decide to start shifting down here. So now this position, I've continued every single turn to try and move towards a different section of the map, leveraging my position. So now, Reimer in this position, he knows I'm going down to the bottom side of the map, so he has to do something, because if he has inaction on this turn, then I have the full, like, if he just stays in a defensive position here, then I'm like, okay, good, you're not doing anything, I just back off, I don't show any units on my top side, and this entire army goes down here, crushes this side, and he loses all of these properties. So his choice here is to move up just a little bit, not into a super aggressive position, but with his medium tanks he figures that he can wall off these artillery, and he's got a bunch of artillery set up in this location, so making a slow push here makes the most sense in his situation. So now for me, I saw that this recon went up here, and I figured that I didn't want him to have, it's actually, I think, more the reason I decided to go up towards this ball of units that I don't know about, is because this infantry in particular on the mountain is threatening a cap, and I really just want to make sure that he has no infantry anywhere near these properties before I move my death ball away. So move my infantry up here, see there's nothing happening down here, and then go for the hits here. I see that there's an artillery, and I see a wall break here, potential. So go for the Neo tank hit, into the tank hit. Medium tank kills the artillery in one shot, and then I can get that copter with my anti-air. And once I've shifted up these units up here, I don't want to shift back down. I want to make sure that these units are fully covered if there's another engagement. So I bring over my full death ball. And then continue to ferry these infantry down here that can like interrupt caps. Keep this infantry in range to interrupt. I want to keep that 1k lead. So on his turn, goes for the turbocharge to try and get something done here. Gets the hit onto the medium tank, kills off that tank. The medium tank can kill off the tank. Kills off that infantry, reveals the infantry here, because this anti-air can't get too much value otherwise. You can see everything that's happening. Kills off this infantry, so that infantry in the forest gets a nice defensive location. Gets trapped here, but then can kill off that infantry with his recon. Moves back the transport copter to ferry the infantry to protect the artillery. And then moves up his medium tank into the forests. But on this turn, I'd been talking about the entire game how you don't want to go into an opponent's side and go really deep. But there are a couple exceptions to the rule. The first is if you see like a really big wall break or like really big engagement that you can take that looks game ending. So right here, I can use the Neo tank to kill off this medium tank and then another Neo tank to kill off a medium tank. And then I can just kind of go crazy because that's like a huge trade, and these are the best units for the Neo tank to kill, and there's two opportunities right here. So I go for the turbocharge, kill off medium tank, kill off the medium tank, hit that recon, reveal the artillery, kill off that wound that anti-air, go in, kill that infantry, and hit the artillery. And at this point, I'm just like going really aggressive because, like, basically the two choices he had was either let me move down to the bottom side and get these properties, or continue to fight me despite having a weaker army. So this is sort of the end result of that choice. There wasn't really a better choice in that instance. I think he did take sort of the best choices he had given his situation. But from this situation, I think it's pretty lost. There's very few counterplay left. He has just a few stragglers that can clean up the really overextended units. But he resigns in this position. So I think the main thing that I want to draw to is in this situation, I always moved my units, kept moving them back and forth, but I never overextended to try and take properties that were around this line, past this line. Never tried to. Always my entire plan was about threatening to potentially go down to the south and then him not being able to respond, but I kept changing where I was pressuring. So here I'm pressuring the center, now I'm pressuring in the top center, or like the top sort of corner. He moves back, I move back to the center. He defends the center, I decide to go down to the bottom side to threaten that. When he moves up this recon, try to see this, I'm like, okay, well, probably should try to move up back towards the top side because of these infantry trying to cap up here. Once I move here and he decides to take an engagement, then of course you're going to fight back on that turn. When he moves back, I decide to move down. And then you're given the option of either pushing forward back towards a stronger opponent with a stronger army, or letting them overrun a side and take a bunch of properties, which would also be losing. So then here he chooses to sort of push and try to get something or threaten something so that I don't take everything for free, and then ends up being a brawl where I can win and end out the game. So I hope you learned something from this game, and I'll be making some more videos soon. Hope to see you guys later. Bye.